Hi everybody, this is Leo Vlant with part 3 of 4 of the White Light Paramahamsa Swan Dream series. Now let's move on and look at the lucid part of the White Light Dream. The Paramahamsa Swan symbol, from what I know of Vedantic Hindu Indian traditions, is suggestive of enlightenment and realization. But then we find, as the legends tell us, that the god of creation, Brahma, but also Saraswati, his consort, who's the goddess of knowledge and the creative arts, well, that they're both carried around by the same kind of Paramahamsa swans. So, okay, that makes two birds, not just one. So if there's two birds, then does that mean that there could be two forms of enlightenment? And because the Paramahamsa Swan is so integrally connected to the white light in my white light dream, well, I'd infer from that the white light would be some essential element in the enlightenment process. But yeah, which enlightenment process? Or are we looking at both at the same time, if that's even possible? Yeah, I'm thinking here that we might need to dig a little bit more into my background to get a better idea what's going on with my dream here. I'd actually experienced the white light before, but in real life, so we can look to see if we can find any clues there. So yeah, there was a Sikh guru who came to town, Singh, 1925 to 2005, one of the many Sikh gurus who claimed succession rights from Singh, 1894 to 1974. Well, to put this into context, let me tell you that way back in college, when I'd first gotten into spirituality, I had friends who were Singh devotees, especially one in particular, a young woman, certainly the purest and one of the prettiest girls I'd ever known. So I might have joined up with them. But Singh was famously very strict about celibacy, vegetarianism, and putting in most hours of the day into meditating. Well, I knew I couldn't comply with that, and I didn't feel like pretending to be. And since those Singh people weren't my only friends, well, that meant I had the latitude to keep shopping around for some more user-friendly spiritual path. And it didn't take me long to find one, a derivative of Kundalini yoga that wouldn't take up too much of my time or crimp too much of my style. But about a couple decades later, I still had plenty of respect for Singh and anybody else who could plausibly say he was Singh's successor. And that's when I heard that Singh was on tour and coming to town. So yeah, it was 8 years before my white light dream, and I showed up at one of Singh's advertised events, and without having to pay a dime, I got a chance to sit with some others about 10 feet away from him, and we were supposed to close our eyes, and he'd advance along the line and take a moment to focus on each of us, and when he got to me, well, there was the white light. Yeah, first thing I did was open my eyes a little bit just to make sure they weren't screwing with me somehow. And no, I didn't see anything suspicious. And it wasn't some trick with my visual field either. You know, like negative after images from looking at bright colored lights before closing my eyes, or pressing on my closed eyelids, which would create a light bloom. No, that darkness behind my closed eyes, it remained dark. But the white light I experienced was inside my forehead at the position of my third eye ajna chakra. No, it wasn't bright, but it was there. It's like seeing a 5-watt nightlight bulb through a tissue. Mild but noticeable. But this initiation had its limitations. It wasn't like my Kundalini initiations where I was allowed to keep them and take them home with me afterwards. Thakur Singh's white light was gone in an instant. Yeah, when he moved down the line, well, the white light moved down with him. And just as though he was walking along with a book of matches, lighting each one of us up in turn, but being careful to immediately blow each one of us out again before moving on. It felt kind of dismissive. But still, I was rather impressed. I'd just gotten back from a trip to India, and while I had plenty of stories to tell, well, it was only back home that a guru was really able to do anything as significant as this white light demonstration, as limited as it was. But yes, I've thought of before and after in order to determine whether there had been any lasting effects that Thakur Singh's momentary initiation into the white light might have had for me. And well, no, nothing new happened for me, and all the same old stuff stayed the same. It seems only worth remembering as a curiosity. But there may be other factors to consider. For instance, when Thakur Singh died, he appointed Sant Mat Baljit Singh as his successor, a fine man who's been sending me his magazine, Know Thyself as Soul, for the last 20 years or so, and again without me having to pay a dime. So yeah, maybe I'm supposed to keep my eye on Baljit Singh. Also, there's this sweet and very accomplished spiritual lady specializing in the right-hand Brahma path of transcendentalism. Her name is Miriam, and she has a YouTube channel, The Ocean of Consciousness. Well, the only thing I have in common with Miriam is her connection to Thakur Singh. She was a devotee of his. And if I hadn't known that about her, well, it's likely I wouldn't even have noticed her. And yeah, she sort of reminds me of my old college, girlfriend. You know, that devotee of Kirpal Singh. Yeah, I figured that if Miriam could be successful on that path, then my taller, prettier, purer girlfriend must have been enlightened years ago, and good for her, right? But none of that's really connected to that white light initiation, is it? So yeah, maybe Thakur Singh's white light initiation was just some kind of a calling card from spirit. Something that had to happen so that something else could happen later. But yes, where were we? We'd been discussing the possibility that the white light may be somehow instrumental with not just one mode for enlightenment, but two, a right hand and a left hand path. Well, was there anything I did in life that might have cultivated the white light or given me some susceptibility for it in either one way or the other? Well, there's my Kundalini yoga, but in the waking state, the Kundalini in the system of Kundalini yoga I belong to, well, it seems more like a pranic airy energy that comes across as just a pressure sensation, and not like the liquid fiery energy that we usually associate with the Kundalini. Yeah, I'm something of a skeptic in regards to even my own guru and his system, where the Kundalini is so mild and safe that, well, if it's mild and safe, then how could it be the Kundalini, right? But it is some kind of pranic, airy kind of energy, and it does open up chakras that weren't open before. And so while I don't think it's the classic Kundalini, well, it's gotta be something. But yeah, it still makes me uncomfortable following my guru and calling it the Kundalini, when I know that so many people would have very good reasons for disagreeing. If only he'd named his system pure energy yoga or something innocuous like that, then these misunderstandings about the Kundalini could have been obviated. But yeah, if I was cynical, I'd say that my guru used the word Kundalini for its greater commercial appeal. Although he was certainly scholar enough to know what it really was, and so he must have intentionally concealed the name of what he was actually working with. But yeah, it's a good thing I'm not cynical, huh? But yeah, I've had plenty of snake dreams, and that's about as Kundalini as you can get. And once in such a dream, I was confronted by this big cobra snake, and well, a dream guru suddenly appeared who said, "To kill one snake, you must use another." And suddenly he had another cobra snake by the tail, and he was swinging it over his head like a lasso rope and released it so that it tangled up into the other snake. You know, like one of those caduceus symbols that the medical organizations use. And the snakes both tightened around and constricted on each other until both their heads exploded in a burst of white light. So yeah, that would be my only Kundalini association to the white light. But, well, now that I think about it, what was that dream supposed to mean? It seems to indicate that the white light manifests during conflict in order to overcome resistance. It can also be kind of destructive too, huh? And aren't snakes supposed to be bad things? But they have plenty of white light in them, don't they? But how bad could they be if for a moment they did look like one of those medical caduceus things that I suppose are symbolic of healing somehow? So yeah, that little dream asks more questions than it answers, doesn't it? But so we better move on. But still, we're no closer to discerning my path, are we? So let's get serious. What would make me different enough to be a kind of lightning rod for the white light? I just grew up with a normal childhood just like everybody else, didn't I? Well, not exactly. I've always been in about the top 15 percentile as far as mental functionality is concerned. And that could possibly be a factor. You know that the white light can only flourish in those who are a bit on the bright side already. And then during my childhood, I did have some unique interests that may have set their mark on me. For instance, my first noble ambition, starting when I was 6 years old, was to be a pilot. This happened after I'd witnessed two light planes collide and then crash, both spinning into the ground while one detached wing trailed behind, up in the sky, fluttering down like a wounded butterfly. I suppose I was impressed with the feeling that flying and the risks involved could be exhilarating, but even then I was sensible enough to look across at the airfield and see that the vast majority of airplanes were perfectly okay, meaning that their pilots were as alive, hale, and hearty as everybody else, all while enjoying the bad boy notoriety of being super cool daredevils. And well, so it seemed like becoming a pilot would be to take on an interesting kind of heroic persona, while having some real fun that would be well worth a few risks, right? But I also had set for myself as a condition for learning to fly that I had to learn first how to juggle in order to train myself in quick hand-eye coordination. For, after all, I wasn't crazy, and I knew that to minimize my risks as a pilot, well, I would have to be a good pilot, right? Also, there was the consideration that if they thought I was awkward and clumsy, well, they wouldn't let me anywhere near a real airplane, would they? so training myself to a quick and sure dexterity would be a good way to advance both my safety and my success. Then, to help me along with the sheer physical exercise of doing all that juggling, well, I brought music into the mix as a kinetic motivator, and that gave the hobby of juggling a life of its own. Yeah, I designed throw patterns to look like the music while keeping the throws and catches in time to the music. It turned me into a dancing juggler. But yes, eventually I put the balls aside. You know, people mistake jugglers for clowns, and clowns have huge persona problems. But I stayed with the dancing and music, and then I learned to play a number of musical instruments by ear. And while I did get the flying license, well, actually airplanes aren't very useful, and I replaced them with racing motorcycles and fast cars. Now, at first you wouldn't think so, but dancing and racing have a lot in common, particularly with how the minds of both dancer and racer must be able to precisely model the physical forces and limits that reality imposes upon performance, with the difference being that a racer has to know his or her vehicle as well as the dancer knows his or her own body. Then the special trick to dancing and playing music is that they were both highly conformative, with the song you are given being a circumscribing structure. But there are an infinite number of ways to comply within those boundaries. A dancer can design his or her own choreography, and the musician can arrange his or her own parts. Now, none of that is fixed precisely by logical imperative, but is rather in the domain of aesthetics. You know, whatever seems beautiful, clever, or cool works fine, as long as it still fits within whatever parameters of timing or key that apply. And all that optionality brings intuition into play. You know, how can you decide what's best when there's no hard or fast standards to go by? So perhaps the factor that separates me out from the crowd was my high exposure to intuition and intuitive flashes. Well, but then again, there was also my ability to follow through on achieving my first noble ambition. Then I really did learn how to fly by the time I was 16. And you know, I largely did it by myself. It's neither of my parents wanted to explicitly support me in it, not wishing to be the one blamed if I got myself killed. Yeah, but they paid for all my siblings' music lessons, all while I had to hump golf bags to pay for my own flying. And no, I never resented them in the least for that screw over. But yeah, so only having myself to depend on and myself to confide in, and then being successful at it, yeah, well, that made me self-reliant and sure of myself. Yes, as a boy I was my own best role model. Well, if you don't count all those pilots I sat up at the counter with and all those airport coffee shops wearing my little aviation-style dark glasses and my cute little imitation bomber's jacket. Oh, wait a second. When you think about it, well, who was role modeling for whom? You know, I was so much into cultivating and presenting the image of an archetypical pilot, though in miniature, that it was more like I was their role model, right? You know, just imagine how hard those guys had to try in order to be good examples for the kid. Yeah, however all that went, well, all that aviation stuff worked out for me, and it gave me a kind of an early swagger that usually only the jocks ever get to experience. But I was an intellectual, and that gave the swagger a unique feel, don't you think? It would especially set me apart when I went to college. Of course, well, swagger really isn't spiritual, is it? Yeah, once at college, I was putting up flyers for a spiritual meeting, and a friend of mine reacted in surprise, telling me, "But Leo, you're the least spiritual person I know." Yeah, I laughed and said, "Thank you," but he really did have a point. My overabundance and self-confidence probably looks a lot like ego. And that's the spiritualist's worst enemy, isn't it? But yeah, maybe we can account for that later with one of those spiritual paradoxes I'm always trotting out. So yeah, enough of that for now. Let's get back to our discussion on intuition. You know, it's my guess that a lot of people are probably not very familiar with what an intuitive flash even is. So, well, let's explain. What happens with an intuitive flash is in a split instant you are given a plan for the next 5 to 10 seconds, and all you have to do is go along with it. Any hesitation will nullify the flash. They're in the moment kind of things. That is, you need to pull that trigger now. You need to take that pull shot now. You need to play that riff now. You need to jump up on the table and dance between the drinks now. You know, whatever the intuitive flash dictates, you gotta do it without any hesitation. And no, they're not infallible. You still have to be able to perform up to the level of the intuitive conception. But generally, they work as promised if you just follow through with the flash. And the more intuitive flashes you get, the more you learn to trust them, going along with their flow. And your performance level will in time come up to meet the demands of your intuitive impulses. Also, there's a kind of barrier set up for intuition. It's what I call the magic 90 minutes. You know how people talk about flow and being in the zone? Well, when you look into flow and zone theory, you'll notice that you see the term 90 minutes coming up again and again. Really, people who just practice stuff for an hour are really cheating themselves. Really, after just an hour, you're still just warming up. Now, after 75 minutes, you can sense the change that's coming. But after 90 minutes, well, you're warmed up to your peak and your performance becomes inspired. Yeah, if you're just starting out with something, it won't make you an instant expert, but you will be in the zone for rapid learning, and your learning will take intuitive leaps. So maybe my susceptibility to the white light was fostered first by aspiring to and then by working toward a noble ideal. And then by all this cultivation of intuition. And when you think about it, well, isn't that really just doing exactly the opposite of meditation? You know, by practicing the active arts and developing kinetic or conceptual skills. Quieting my mind and sitting still would have seemed like a huge waste of time, wouldn't it? But always thinking, and always acting with a sense for presentation and an image, well, that was working out great for me, wasn't it? So, okay, what kind of path does that sound like it's suggestive of? Well, isn't that the path of knowledge in the creative arts for which the goddess Saraswathi is the patron goddess? And yeah, in cultural and mythical terms, they do speak of feminine muses and inspirations in conjunction with the arts. But aren't the arts really just so much practice, practice, practice? So much so that intuition has to kick in. Really, nowhere on God's green earth can one find long labor, dedicated enthusiasm without also finding intuition. It may very well be that intuition is the left hand of God, and that to attain it we only need to reach out and take it. Preferably for more than 90 minutes a day. Well, that's it for part 3. And now on to the 4th and final part of my series. And in part 4, we find that the white light might not be the only thing going on. And then we'll do some comparison shopping between the 2 forms of enlightenment. But yeah, and thanks everybody. And now let me keep shooting.